Recognizing the member from Columbia River, Revelstoke.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an absolute pleasure to see you sitting in that chair. It's not only my pleasure today, but my duty to rise in this House and speak on behalf of my hardworking, mountain-loving constituents back in Columbia River, Revelstoke. And when I speak for them as best as I can with my voice. And we're also proud of our riding that is about the area, same size of Switzerland. I want to take this opportunity also to recognize my colleagues back at home in Kimberley and in Revelstoke, Siobhan Staplin and also Chelsea Muhlendyke, who do such an amazing job on my behalf when I'm in this House and on my behalf when I'm not. I really want to thank them for that. And this work doesn't work without them. And I also want to thank all the staff here that help us on our side of the House. They are truly amazing as well, and we're such a collaborative team, and I just want to say thank you to them as well. Madam Speaker, I've had the opportunity now for several years to hear different budgets from the folks across the aisle, and I've got to say that this is probably, given the things that are going on in our province today, in our world today, likely the worst I've ever seen. I think it should come as no surprise. It's a budget from a government who was voted to be the most secretive government in Canada. And the reason that I mention that, and it's a moniker that is actually carried through in this budget because of the lack of transparency. It's a big secret, it's a mystery, and we're not really sure about why that is. Lots of platitudes. Nothing in there but repeated promises from a premier that has done that for 5 years. And Madam Speaker, I really want to underscore the 5 years because I'm going to come back to that. That number is really important, so I'm going to come back to that in a little while. And trust me, in my constituency, in my riding, this behavior of untruth has not gone unnoticed. And so many of my constituents and my friends are livid. They're very alive, Madam Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, very alive to the fact that there are extreme differences between the words that are in this budget and the actual deliverables and actions that have not been delivered. We all know that COVID has created challenges far beyond what anyone could ever have imagined. And today, there's this time of uncertainty when the future is uncertain. And I know that my constituents, as well as most other British Columbians, need hope and a plan to tackle the big issues that we face in this province because they're monumental. And the key word there is plan, and I'll come back to that. Yet when I see this budget, what I see immediately is more tax and uncertainty. And in this budget, I don't find there's little hope around affordability issues, the rising cost of housing, the rising cost of gas, and the rising cost of groceries. I was just up at the grocery store here the other night, and people are sifting through trying to find the best specials and so on and so forth because it's expensive. It's got way more expensive in this province, and it's hurting people. Little hope for affordable daycare, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. Little hope when it comes to the safety of friends and family who may be struggling with either mental health or addictions or both. Little hope for finding a really good job, keeping their small businesses open after COVID. Little hope of finding a family doctor. One of the biggest issues in my riding that I hear about is we can't find a family doctor. But let's talk about affordability, and with all due respect, since the NDP have taken power since 2017, I think there's been around 26 new taxes that have been imposed on my constituents. And just in this budget alone, it's introduced 3 more taxes. One to collect PSG charges on Facebook Marketplace or eBay. And they say it's going to collect about $100 million. Well, I tell you what, during the COVID pandemic, had it not been for those platforms, people wouldn't have been able to get anything. The stores were shut. Now they're going to tax that. That comes out of people's pockets. They did that to Netflix, and I know that one of the members across the aisle from Vernon Monashee the other day had mentioned Netflix wasn't that important. Well, had it not been for Netflix and COVID, people wouldn't have had any entertainment at all. So I was surprised to hear that from that member, with all due respect with her background. New rules for private used car sales. This is an interesting one, I've got to say, Mr. Speaker. If you get a good deal on a car, that's a good thing. There's a negotiation that goes on here, and you got to remember that these cars, used cars, not everybody can buy a new car. Not everybody. I don't buy new vehicles. I don't. I buy used vehicles for a variety of reasons. But if you buy a used vehicle, you're going to get taxed on that now. And I want to humanize this to some extent. So a single mom, and I'm using this as an example because I know of a mom, with two kids, a single mom with 2 kids, finds a van on Craigslist for around $10,000. That's not a bad deal if you look at it from a dealership's perspective even. It's a great deal. But the Black Book says it's worth $12,500. So the Black Book versus the deal, and the mom's going, well, that's a good deal for me, it's great. But now with this new tax, they're going to go to that Black Book and they're going to say to that mom, you got to take the $12,500 cost, because that's the actual cost the Black Book says it is. Instead of the $10,000, we're going to tax you on that $2,500, which is about $200, give or take, $175, $200. So when you think about that from a single mom's perspective, $175, what could $175 buy? Do some new shoes for the kids, some more food for the kids, maybe some skating lessons. That's going to affect people's bottom line. And it's an unfair tax. And I was absolutely shocked, Mr. Speaker, when one of the members across the aisle actually alluded to the fact yesterday that people who buy used cars are trying to scam the system. They're actually trying to evade taxes and be fraudulent. I was absolutely appalled when I heard that in that context and reference. I know that member has hundreds, if not thousands, of people in that riding who buy used cars. I don't know how well that will bode in the next election. Also, Mr. Speaker, people buy used cars. I have a good friend of mine who's never been formally trained as a mechanic, but has an aptitude. Right from high school, he had an aptitude for vehicles. And he would fix these vehicles. So if, let's say you go and buy a car that's got a bad muffler, or there's a head gasket that needs to be replaced, or a timing chain. Most people don't know how to do that. Well, he did. And one of the things that he would do for neighbors is he'd fix it for free, just for parts. No charge, just parts. So that could be a goodwill tax, if you will, because now if he did that today in this province, then those repairs that he made for free would actually be taxable. So it doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. And I guess what kind of insults the buyer the most about this is that these cars have already been taxed at least once, maybe twice, as they've been flipped over and over and over again. So it's almost like double or triple dipping on these vehicles. And the thing that I think frustrates me the most, Mr. Speaker, is that it has an effect on middle and especially lower income people who tend to buy more vehicles that are used. And as I say, it doesn't really matter what income bracket you are. I don't particularly buy new vehicles either. But if you don't believe me, you just need to look on page 91 of the budget, and it's very clear that it says individuals involved in private vehicle transactions, this is out of the budget, are more likely to be low to medium income. So why would you do that to low to medium income people? It doesn't make any sense. We see new taxes at a time when we see people shifting their buying habits, again in grocery stores. They're looking at brand items, not the cheaper cuts of meat to make their grocery bills and lessen their dollars last. More taxes despite the Premier's promise during the last election that there wouldn't be any more. And I'll quote him. Our plan, and I quote, "Our plan does not include any new taxes. We have no intention of raising new taxes." Broken promise, another one. You know what, Mr. Speaker, I reflect back on my late dad, and one of the lessons he taught me is that, you know, when you make a promise, and I can hear his words ringing in my ear right now, when you make a promise and you give somebody your word, it's your bond, it's your honor. And because of these broken promises, I don't find a lot of honor in this budget. There's no honor there. Broken promises. And I'm not sure, again, why the Premier is doing everything possible to decrease affordability for those on low and middle incomes in this province, knowing that about 53% of British Columbians are now around $200 away from insolvency. What does that mean? That means if something comes up, car breaks down, something comes up, there's a flood in your basement, you're done, you're baked. But yet we have more taxes. You recall the Premier's 2017 election when we're talking about rental in this province. $400 rental debate. 5 years later, there it is again, 5 years. 5 years later, no rebate. What do we hear? Well, we're getting to it, 5 years later. And yet, that side of the House claimed to be the champion of renters. So how has life changed for renters in the past 5 years? Well, the stats will tell you that they've actually gotten worse, Mr. Speaker, and life has become more unaffordable. In fact, the BC Rental Project gives BC a C grade because, and I quote, "Their strategy has been to pile on regulation and taxes, which has forced many rental providers out of the market," unquote. The tax that was brought forward that protects renters, and I've been a landlord, and I know how important it is to protect your renters, has actually chased landlords out of the rental market. Where I live, we are struggling to find homes for renters, struggling. Why? Because the homes that used to be rental homes are now Airbnb homes. Why? Because the owners of those homes did not like renters. They didn't like the enforcement that this government was putting on, taking away their rights. So they switched them over to Airbnbs, and they're making a ton of money. Taking that product right out of the market for a simple reason, because of the rental legislation that was put forward by this government. So when you're looking at low rental in my area, I would say the mirror that you're looking into is an NDP mirror. I can factually tell you that there's virtually no rental in my riding, and it's problematic. Not only problematic for workers, because we can't find workers. Every business in my riding is looking for workers. I think there was about 500 jobs available in Revelstoke just the other day, because there's no place to live. There's nowhere to live. Housing prices have soared. A modest 3-bedroom home in Revelstoke with a really nice lot, fairly close to the ski hill, not a lot of renovations, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. It's going for $900,000 plus. Unaffordable. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the NDP to provide real solutions for this growing disaster, and they must be positive. It's a supply issue, and they've got to address that issue. And then there's the small businesses. The majority of small business owners or businesses in my riding are small business owners. And when I look through this budget, there's no support to help them today. There's no relief for key competitive issues facing businesses. The employer's health tax, despite other provinces taking action to reduce theirs, ours continues, hurting small businesses who have struggled throughout COVID. No action on split assessment, which means that more local shops will be driven out of the communities as housing prices skyrocket. And that's what I just referred in terms of Revelstoke. No relief for energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, which provide great jobs and stable revenue for the province. People need real help, and they need it now, and they need support now. Workers and families and their kids and their businesses will continue to pay the price if the NDP continue to travel down this road in what I think is a very incompetent way. What we need is a defined private sector jobs plan, and a jobs plan for all communities, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And these are missing in this budget. There's no jobs plan. And I want to refer, and that's why I said 5 years. It's been about 5 years since this NDP government took power. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be using this as not as a prop, but I'm actually going to be reading from it as part of my presentation, just to make you aware of that. In 2011, the BC Liberals set out a direction for this province. There was a business plan, and if you've been in business, you understand this. There was a business plan with objectives, targets, strategies, measurement tools, key performance indicators, everything that a business plan should have. We set that business plan in action. 5 years later, we measured it. And 5 years later, this document was put forward, a 5-year update on the BC Jobs Plan, something that the NDP don't have except for anecdotal information. It set ambitious targets, and I'm just going to read a few things that we measured, and we knew we'd hit the mark. There are some things we weren't hitting the mark, and we changed our strategies on that. Signs of success. In 2011, we were third in economic growth in this country. By 2016, we were first. 2011, we were ninth in job growth in this country. 2016, we were first. The unemployment rate, we were fourth in Canada. In 2016, we were the lowest in Canada. Some of the key accomplishments that were in our business plan that we measured, that were indicated through our budgets, woven through and into our budgets. One of my biggest favorites, and I know at that time Premier Christy Clark, it was one of her directives and her favorite initiatives, was that, and I read from this document, it says, BC continues to help single parents on income and disability assistance become financially independent through the Single Parent Employment Initiative. That initiative was one of and it was oversubscribed. Thousands of single moms and dads took part, Mr. Speaker, in that program, oversubscribed, paid their tuition, paid their rent, paid their daycare. It was a hand up, not a handout, and it was successful, very successful. And we set that as part of our goal in 2011, and we measured it with a plan. Rural economic development was another focus that we had. And what we discovered is under the first intake of the Rural Dividend Program, we created a Rural Dividend Program of $9 million to communities that could apply through that program. Very, very successful. We found that we were successful in programs with people for disabilities. Agri-foods, foods. We'd set a target in 2011, and in 2016 we knew that the value of agri-food and seafood shipments to South Korea have risen 63% from 33 million to 54 million since the launch of the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement in 2015. That's an accomplishment. That's part of 16 years of success, folks. That's what success looks like. Successes in forestry, international education. We increased the number of international students in BC by 40,016, or 44%, since the launch of the BC Jobs Plan in 2011. Lots of those students stayed and worked here in British Columbia. And the list goes on and on here, Mr. Speaker. We updated the municipal regional district tax, which provided and one of the members across the way will know that. For local tourism marketing and projects, we did that. We did that. Was in our budget. Was in our budget. One of the most successful provinces, if not the most successful provinces in Canada at that time. And then we also, as part of the $30 million Aboriginal Skills Development Fund, the province invested $10 million more to support community-driven skill training to prepare Aboriginal and Indigenous people for LNG opportunities. So the reason I read through this document, and the important point that I'm trying to make, is that I truly believe that the folks on the other side want to do well by British Columbians. I believe that. I really, truly do. But they don't know how. They've got ideas, but you have to formulate a plan. You have to formulate a plan and put it into a business plan with something that you can measure. And I don't see anything about that measurement here. What about kids in this budget? I remember in 2017, during that campaign, the $10 a day care. And the opponent that I had, fine gentleman, actually from one of my communities, was really hyping that up, $10 a day care. Didn't win the election for him, but that was 5 years ago. And what do we have today? Nothing. Now it's going up to $20 a day. I mean, next year it might be $30 a day. We just don't know. And it's not just about spaces. The folks, Mr. Speaker, across the aisle talk about spaces, all these spaces that we've created. You can have as many spaces as you want, but if you don't have instructors, if you don't have ECE teachers, you got nothing. And I haven't seen a lot of growth in that area as well. So $10 a day care in 2017, and now it's up to $20 a day. And one of the things, Mr. Speaker, that breaks my heart, that's not in this budget, deals with kids with autism. Parents of children with autism continue to be ignored, I think, frankly, in my humble opinion, by this government. There's insufficient funding to manage the transition to a hub-based service model. And I don't propose to be an expert on this at all. But despite clawing back individual funding from more than 25,000 children with autism and their families, kids in my riding who have autism and their families in my riding that have kids that have autism, there's just $40 million added funding for children and youth with supportive needs in this year's budget. This government has no ears. They have listened, Mr. Speaker, to hundreds of parents and kids who stood on the stairs of this special place, pleading their case not to have this happen to them. This government has no ears. And I know that they've been there because I stood there with them, and yet nothing in this budget that helps them. Nothing in this budget that recognizes those voices. And I say shame. I say shame. The housing crisis, Mr. Speaker, continues to deepen year after year. It's deepening every month, it's every day, and there's no end in sight, or most frighteningly, no solution. Lots of words, but the same old, no action. Success is measured by action. Success is measured by tangible results. And there's nothing but antidote. The National Bank report estimates that it would take 36 years, 432 months, to save for a down payment on a typical Vancouver home. Well, you think of Vancouver where I live, and it's a massive city. I mean, I live, my riding is remote rural. I live rural myself. And when you think of Vancouver, you think of this big city, and you think about, 36 years. Well, it's not that far off now for the kids that I represent. It's expensive. Prices since COVID have been driven to the ceiling in the valleys that I live from, Revelstoke to Kimberley. Affordability is not there. It's not there in housing. It's not there in food. It's not there in gas. We don't have electric vehicles where I live. Well, that's not true. We do. That's actually false. We have a few of those vehicles, But I'll tell you, and the member across the way, I think, might even have one of those, and I applaud him for that. But here's the thing. When winter hit this year and we had this severe blizzard, people got caught in Kootenay National Park and couldn't get out of Kootenay National Park because of the rerouting of the Trans-Canada Highway. And I'm going to thank the minister just a minute, so I'm not picking on you. I'm actually going to give you some credit here today. The ones that were being towed out of the park were electric vehicles because they sat there for 13 hours. Oh, that's a fact. That's a fact. You can talk to the RCMP about that if you want. So in any event, Mr. Speaker, there's not a lot there in terms of affordability on that. Gas prices. Gas prices. What we know that the cost of living is up in BC over 4%. And gas prices are higher than ever, and the fact that fuel taxes are going up is, in this budget, highest in the history of British Columbia. The Premier said the other day, we're going to look at whatever tools we can to make life more affordable. Well, how is this more affordable? How is this more affordable? Then he turns around and said, I was just shocked by this, because I have a lot of respect for the Premier. Then he turns around and says, if you can't afford gas, take a bus. Like, where I live, we don't have buses. We don't have transportation. Talk about tone deaf to the needs of rural BC. Let me quote from a mom that actually my colleague earlier on used this quote this morning during question period about the gas prices and the comment of the Premier. And I quote, "Sure, I'll pile all of our 4 kids on the bus tomorrow and somehow get them to the respective schools on time. And then I'll carry my 10 bags of groceries on that bus and try to get them home." It doesn't work. It's a punitive tax. And the government controls a lot of those taxes. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I know I'm getting close to the end of my talk, but I want to talk about a couple of things, and that's wildlife management. I come from a place that used to be known as the Serengeti of ungulates. I'm a hunter. I elk hunt every year. I didn't get one last year. Couldn't find one. Experienced people that I hunt with who have hunted as long as I have couldn't find one. There were 2 meetings in Cranbrook with distinguished biologists. The late Dr. Val Geist, who was from here in Victoria, talked about this. The numbers are declining all over this province. And it's habitat and it's water, it's a symbiotic relationship. And I am actually really thrilled to hear that there's this new ministry, Mr. Speaker, that has been formed across the aisle. I am very excited to hear that. I have nothing but respect for that individual who's become that minister, and then the Flynn Road minister has my equal respect, and I look forward to working with both of them on the wildlife issue. But right now, it's not this government's fault. There's not been a government since the 1950s that has taken this seriously. But we've got to work together on this, and the Premier always says we need to collaborate, we need to collaborate. Well, here's something we can collaborate on. The bighorn sheep in Radium are under stress because of vehicles. And this is where I'm going to thank the Minister of Transportation through you, Mr. Speaker. His staff, all the way back from Ron Sharp to Katie Well Award right now, have been absolutely amazing to work with. And I want to recognize them and the efforts that have been made and the money that has been spent on trying to save these sheep. So, Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, I want to say thank you for that. And I look for continue to working on this project with you and other ministries. Rural health care. We need more rural transportation. Nothing in that budget. Access to health care. Access to a family doctor. Access to Alberta. I've been working on that since I met with the Alberta minister 3 times before COVID hit. We've got to start looking at some of these things that deal with rural British Columbia. I'm almost out of time, Mr. Speaker, so it's clear that fighting unaffordability for people really in this budget is not the priority of this government. But was one of the making life more affordable the Premier and his cabinet ministers? $40,000 and $20,000 bump in their pay. God, I don't know how they can do that at a time when British Columbians are being hit with higher housing costs, higher rents, higher fuel costs, and the list goes on. So in short, Mr. Speaker, I could go on and on and on, but I can't. I think this budget is short-sighted, it's divisive, it's irresponsible, and as such, I cannot support it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, member.